All right, health ranchers, let's talk about insulin because insulin is ultimately what's causing a lot of problems in today's society with type 2 diabetes. A lot of people that come to me are either borderline diabetic, are diabetic, or suffer from a lot of hypoglycemia, which pretty much is borderline diabetic because what happens when you're hypoglycemic, which means that you have a low blood sugar symptoms where you get shaky and agitated and angry and irritable, nauseous, sweaty, that kind of stuff. What's happening in the body is the body's trying to tell you it needs some sort of fuel to get over that hump. So usually, obviously, the first thing you want to grab is a quick acting carbohydrate, which is like the worst thing you could possibly take when you're feeling that way. A complex carbohydrate with a protein would be much better. More optimal is don't eat the freaking carbohydrate, and you end up with this nice level insulin level in your body, and you don't end up with type 2 diabetes. Insulin is a really fascinating chemical that's produced by the pancreas. And the pancreas is this little, well, it's tucked up kind of in between your liver and your spleen, kind of up in the middle, close to right underneath your diaphragm. And it produces insulin. Insulin is essential to life. You have to have it. If you don't have it, you die, period. I mean, a slow death, albeit, but you die. And sometimes you can die really quickly from insulin coma. So with that being said, what is insulin and what does it do? Insulin helps drive glucose into the cell. When I say glucose, I mean sugar. Anything that is a carbohydrate is a sugar. That means broccoli, that means a cookie. So that sugar has to go into the muscle cell to be utilized. Now the muscle can only hold a certain amount of glucose, about 45 minutes worth of glucose. And once that's stored, it stays there unless you're burning it off. And if you're burning it off, then you can eat more carbohydrates. If you're not burning it off, it's going to stay there. And any kind of carbohydrate that you take in is going to be shuttled and turned into a fatty acid and be stored as fat. It doesn't work any other way. That's how simple it is. The problem is that we overeat on the carbohydrates. We overload the poor little pancreas. The poor little pancreas is just this little guy. It looks like a chewed up piece of pink bubble gum. But it's so important. And when you piss off your pancreas and it finally says enough's enough, I've had it, I'm blowing up, then you become diabetic. And it's pretty much that simple. Now, diabetes is easily reversed. All you have to do, because your cells are constantly renewing, they're constantly healing, and if you give the body the raw building material, it's going to heal itself. So diabetes is totally 100% reversible in most people, unless they just don't care and when they want to die. Now, I used to work on the cardiac floor. Used to be a cardiac nurse in telemetry, and I would say 98% of our heart patients were diabetic. And I'll tell you why. Diabetes starts first, and then the heart starts to break down. Because diabetes ends up, that too much insulin ends up breaking down your blood vessels and your capillaries. And when that starts to happen, you get an extreme inflammatory process. And, you end up with, we have to cut off your toes and we have to cut off your fingers because you end up with gangrene pretty much. There's no blood supply to those exterior tissues. The heart is already stressed. The heart starts to break down because that is completely full of blood supply. And you end up literally being eaten alive by insulin. So that's what happens. So most of your major heart attack patients are diabetic. Who knew? Anytime you're eating insulin, when you're eating a lot of carbohydrates, what happens is that your triglycerides go up. Now, we've had a lot of misinformation about cholesterol, and I'll have a whole thing about cholesterol another time, but suffice it to understand, it's that those triglycerides from the insulin, not eating fat, it's from the insulin, from the carbohydrates overload, that is causing the high triglycerides in the bloodstream. And then you end up with desensitization of the cellular wall to insulin, which is basically insulin resistance or metabolic disease, metabolic disorder. So how does one actually fix that? Well, you have to start thinking that an overload of insulin is actually very toxic to the body. I mean, it is a toxin. It completely starts to break down everything at the cellular level because the blood supply is disrupted and broken. And once a tissue doesn't receive blood or oxygen, it immediately starts to die. And so that's why we cut off people's feet and toes and all kinds of fun stuff when they have diabetes. So it's often called sugar diabetes, not so much up in the north, but like down south, that's what people call it. And I actually prefer that name because that's exactly what it is. It's an overload of glucose in the system. So, carbs aren't evil. What is evil is what the food manufacturers have done to make carbohydrates so concentrated. They've added sugar to canned corn, which is already a very high glucose vegetable in and of itself. They add sugar to most of your canned vegetables, actually. Ketchup is just tomatoes and sugar. It's actually corn syrup. Corn syrup is really quick and easy to make. It's very, very cheap. So that's why it's added to a lot of foods, because the more sweet a food is, the more that releases dopamine and serotonin in the system, and then you end up eating more. So that's one reason that the food companies do that, because hey, if you eat more, you buy more, and that's how they make their money. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's wrong when it comes down to your health. So you have to choose what you want to do with that. So insulin is also very aging. If you look at 40-year-olds that are, 50, 60 pounds overweight and they're having some blood sugar issues, they look 10, 15, 20 years older than they usually are. So it's extremely aging. So if you're a woman and you don't want them wrinkles and you don't want to look older, yeah, you really have to start to make better choices with your carbohydrates and just understanding how they work. So if your muscle is only storing about 45 minutes worth of glucose and you're sitting at a computer all day, where do you think that's going to get used up at? It's just not. So unless you're doing like intense cardio or really intense weightlifting, you're not going to tap into those glucose stores. So say you decided to do a really cool muscle adventure and you're going to go do an intense workout. So you do an intense workout that utilizes that glucose store. That's the time then that you can go have a carbohydrate after something like that. And when I mean carbohydrate, we're talking, 20 grams of carbohydrate. We're not talking 100. We're not talking, 2 pieces of bread and, putting some peanut butter and jelly on there. That is going to overload your depleted muscle. Some of it will get put into the muscle, but then the excess is going to be stored as fat. So that's why it's important to understand how your body works. so many people are so frustrated because they're like, I'm eating right. I'm eating right. Vegans, here's a good one. Most vegans are like, okay, so I'm vegan now, so I don't eat meat, or I don't have dairy products or eggs or anything like that, which there's nothing wrong with that. But do you think most vegans eat vegetables and fruit? Nope. They're going for the bread and the cookies and all the grains, the heavy starches, and then they wonder why they're gaining weight. And they're like, but I'm vegan, I'm not eating meat. Meat doesn't put fat on the body, folks. It's really hard to overeat a steak. Have you ever tried to like binge on meat? You can't do it. I mean, you eat a steak and you're like, I'm done with meat, man. That's good. There's so, I don't think ever in my life have I ever sat down and binged on meat. I dare anybody out there, if you've done it, let me know, because it's just one of those things that you can't do it. So you can't overeat meat. And this whole idea that, oh, if you eat too much protein, it's going to damage your kidneys. Where that got started, it was a bad study to begin with, and they were doing a study on dialysis patients. So they already didn't have a freaking kidney, all right? And you're like, okay, so yeah, you give somebody who doesn't have kidneys extra protein, too much, and then of course they were like insane amounts of protein that it's like normal people don't eat that much protein. And of course it was like, oh, it was causing more kidney damage. And I'm like, but their kidneys are already friggin' damaged. So a lot of these studies are like retarded. I mean, excuse the language, but that is just, it's like, why? What are you trying to accomplish here? But usually there's big companies behind a lot of these studies. So you have to really watch who is funding the studies if you're into that kind of thing. So my whole point with insulin is that you got to have it. It's wonderful. It's highly abused. Your pancreases are incredible organs, and they do wonderful things for you. And you should thank your pancreas every single day that you're alive, that it's functioning and it's working. And you should honor your pancreas by not overloading it with glucose. When you eat something, say you put 2 teaspoons of sugar in your tea, that sugar is converted immediately. Within 7 seconds, it hits the bloodstream. And if it doesn't have a place to go into the muscle, guess where it goes? It's that quick. It begins to be stored as fat like that. So keep that in mind. So about 20 grams of sugar, start looking at your labels and educating yourself, and be aware when you're gonna look at something and eat it, and you're just gonna be like, oh, so on the label it says that it has 15 grams of sugar, let's say, and you want to read underneath there, because if it has some fiber in there, it will tell you what the sugar fibers are. And this is where you get the net carbs. Net carbs just means you can subtract the fiber sugars from the total carbohydrate, and then that's going to be the carbohydrate or the glucose amount that will enter the bloodstream when you adjust it. So again, your complex carbohydrates, that's going to be key, because it slows down that fiber in the complex carbohydrates, actually slows down the glucose. Some of it actually binds to the sugar in the gut and eliminates it through the body. That doesn't mean that you drink, a fiber drink and eat a sundae and it's going to balance that out. That doesn't work that way. But we're talking in nature. So when you eat strawberries or you eat an apple, those are very fibrous fruits. When you eat those things, it actually, even if the apple might have 15 grams of sugar in it, there's going to be a good portion of that that's going to be fiber. So the net effect of that sugar is going to be reduced probably about close to half. So think about those things when you're choosing your foods, and understand insulin. It's, like I said, it's a beautiful, beautiful chemical. So glad we have it. Honor your pancreas. Give it the things that are going to nourish it and make it healthy, so you never have to suffer from diabetes. When you have diabetes, you have to give yourself shots in the stomach. So it's a little teeny tiny needle, but you still got to do it. And then you got to poke your finger all the time and check your blood sugar all the time. So you're constantly poking yourself all over the place. You got bruises all over your tummy. You got fingers are sore because you're poking it, checking your blood sugar. You don't want to do that, so don't. You don't have to go that route. Low blood sugar, that's a different issue. Low blood sugar is the fact that you're probably eating a really high level of sugar. So say you had that, you didn't really eat well that day and you ended up having Dairy Queen Sundae, and that spikes your insulin level, and then it comes crashing down because the insulin actually does its job, pumps it, tries to lower that blood sugar level and push it into the fat tissues because it can't push it anymore into the muscle, and then you get that big drop where you're just like, oh, why am I so tired? And oh, I should be full of energy. I just ate a large Dairy Queen Sundae. But that's what happens. When you eat protein, protein and fat together, that keeps that blood sugar level nice and even. And so you never have those up and down spikes. You never have that wonky feeling. You never have that brain fog when you have a nice, steady energy level. And that in and of itself is really worth it. So take the time, understand insulin, understand what that glucose is doing when you put it in your body. By understanding that, you begin to honor your own body and your own self, and you take care of yourself because you're worth it. All right, guys, I'll talk to you later. If you have any questions, just give me, text me or message me, and I'll be happy to answer. Just put your comments below the video and I'll answer them. All right, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.